Imagine this, you're walking down the street, minding your own business. You're calm, peaceful, just enjoying your day. But then, out of nowhere, a group of people decides to bother you. They think you're weak. They think you won't fight back. Easy target, right? Now, here's the twist: what if they were totally wrong? What if someone they saw as helpless had a hidden power? And not just any power, but something that would shock everyone around them? Today's story will blow your mind. You're about to hear how a group of rude bikers made a huge mistake. They tried to harass a blind woman, not knowing her guide dog wasn't any ordinary dog. Oh no! This dog was a hero, a retired Navy SEAL trained for the most dangerous missions. And let me tell you, those bikers had no idea what was coming. But I want you to do something before we dive into this wild story. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear where you're watching. Are you relaxing at home? On a break from school or work? Maybe out with friends? Just drop a quick message down below, I'll be reading them later. Alright, are you ready? Because what happens next is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. Stick around until the end to see how it all unfolds. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. It was a warm summer afternoon. The sun shined brightly in the sky, and a soft breeze moved through the small, quiet town. People were outside, enjoying the lovely weather. Kids were playing with their bikes. Parents walked with strollers, and shopkeepers smiled at passers-by. It felt like a perfect day. Sophia lived in this town. She had been there for many years, and almost everyone knew her. Sophia was kind to everyone she met. She always smiled and spoke softly. But something made her different from others. A few years ago, Sophia lost her sight due to an accident. She couldn't see anymore. Life had been hard at first, but Sophia never gave up. Slowly, she learned to live without her sight. And she had a very special friend who helped her every day, her guide dog, Max. Max was a large German shepherd with shiny black and tan fur. He walked proudly next to Sophia everywhere she went. People in the town liked Max, too. He was always calm and gentle, never causing trouble. Kids would sometimes come up to him and ask, "Can we pet your dog, Miss Sophia?" Sophia would smile and say, "Sure, as long as he's not working." But what people didn't know was that Max had a past, a very special past. Before he became Sophia's guide dog, Max had been part of the Navy SEALs, one of the most elite military teams in the world. He had been trained to handle dangerous missions and protect people in life or death situations. But now, Max was retired. His mission was to guide and protect Sophia. He didn't need to bark or act tough. His presence alone was enough to make anyone think twice before causing trouble. Sophia didn't want much in life. She liked simple things: quiet walks, the smell of fresh flowers in the park, and the sound of birds singing. Every afternoon, she would take a peaceful walk to the park with Max by her side. She loved the feeling of the warm sun on her face and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. But today was not going to be like any other day. Something was about to happen that would test both Sophia and Max. Sophia and Max started their usual walk in the afternoon. She wore a light summer dress and a pair of sunglasses. Max led her carefully, his leash firm but not too tight in her hand. They passed familiar sights: the bakery where the sweet smell of bread drifted through the air, the ice cream shop where children giggled over melting cones, and the small bookshop with wind chimes that jingled softly whenever someone opened the door. As Sophia walked, she greeted a few people. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Perkins," she said as they passed an elderly woman sitting on her porch. "Good afternoon, Sophia. Enjoy your walk," Mrs. Perkins replied warmly. Sophia felt happy. She always appreciated the kindness of her neighbors. But as they got closer to the park, the atmosphere started to change. It was subtle at first, a shift in the usual peaceful sounds of the town. Max's ears perked up slightly. His body became a little more alert. "Everything okay, Max?" Sophia asked, sensing his tension. Max didn't bark, but he guided her forward with a steady step. He was trained to stay calm in all situations, but he could sense when something wasn't right. And today, his instincts told him to stay on guard. As they reached the entrance to the park, Sophia heard the distant sound of motorcycles. The engines roared loudly, growing closer with each second. She frowned. It wasn't common to hear motorcycles in this area. Most people in the town didn't drive them, especially not in the park. The sound grew louder and louder until it was almost deafening. Max tensed beside her, his muscles tightening under his smooth fur. Then, Sophia heard laughter, rough, mocking laughter from a group of people. "Look at this, boys," a loud voice called out. "A blind lady out for a stroll." More laughter followed. Sophia's heart began to race. She didn't like the tone of their voices. It was cruel, like they thought they were better than her. Max moved closer to her side, his presence reassuring. "Ignore them," Sophia whispered softly to herself. She kept walking, hoping they would leave her alone. But the bikers didn't seem ready to stop. The group of 5 men on motorcycles slowed down and circled around her. They wore leather jackets and helmets with dark visors. Their bikes rumbled loudly, drowning out the peaceful sounds of the park. One of the bikers revved his engine, making a loud, aggressive noise that startled some nearby birds. "Where do you think you're going, lady?" one of the men taunted. "Yeah, shouldn't you have someone with you? What if you trip and fall?" another one sneered. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She had faced small acts of unkindness before, people who didn't understand her disability or made rude comments. But this was different. These men were trying to intimidate her. Max, however, remained steady. He was ready. His ears were forward, and his eyes locked onto the bikers. He wasn't afraid. He was trained to handle danger. One of the bikers made a mistake. He leaned down from his bike and reached out as if to grab Sophia's arm. Before he could get close, Max sprang into action. In one swift movement, he stepped in front of Sophia, positioning himself between her and the man. He didn't bark or growl. Instead, he gave a deep, low warning sound, a sound that sent a chill down the man's spine. "Whoa! Easy there, dog," the biker said, pulling his hand back quickly. "Is that dog dangerous or something?" another man asked, now looking a bit nervous. Sophia stood tall, her voice calm but firm. "Max is my guide dog. He's here to protect me, and I suggest you leave us alone." The men hesitated. For the first time, they seemed to notice the quiet strength in both Sophia and Max. They hadn't expected her to stand up to them. They thought she was weak, but they were wrong. "Come on, guys, let's go," one of the bikers muttered, starting to feel uncomfortable. "Yeah, this isn't worth it," another agreed. Slowly, the group of bikers backed off. They revved their engines again, but this time, it wasn't to intimidate. It was to leave. One by one, they sped away, their motorcycles fading into the distance. Sophia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Max relaxed too, his body language returning to its usual calm state. She knelt down and gently stroked his fur. "Good boy, Max. You did amazing," she whispered. Max wagged his tail lightly, happy to have done his job. He didn't need words to understand her gratitude. As they continued their walk, the peace of the park slowly returned. The birds began singing again, and the gentle breeze rustled the trees. Sophia felt a deep sense of relief and pride. She knew that with Max by her side, she was never truly alone. Sometimes, people judged her because she couldn't see. They assumed she was helpless. But today had proven something important: appearances can be deceiving. Strength isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes, it's quiet, steady, and waiting for the right moment to shine. And for Sophia, Max was the perfect example of that strength. Would you have expected that twist? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever judged someone too quickly and been surprised by their strength? Share your stories, I'd love to read them. Sophia continued her walk near the park, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin and the soft breeze in her hair. The old bike trail was a familiar path to her. She liked the sound of gravel crunching under her feet as she walked. Max guided her carefully, making sure there were no obstacles in her way. It was peaceful, and she felt at ease until the sudden sound of roaring engines shattered the calm. The deep rumble of motorcycles came from behind her. It started low and then grew louder and louder. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting this. Most of the time, the trail was quiet, with only a few joggers or walkers like herself. Motorcycles weren't common here. Then, tires screeched loudly, the noise sharp and unsettling. Sophia stopped for a moment, gripping Max's leash a little tighter. Max stood still, alert. He didn't like the noise either. His ears twitched, and his muscles tensed slightly as the bikes sped past. The vibrations from the engines made the ground feel like it was shaking beneath their feet. "Whoa, look at this!" A voice called out loudly. It came from one of the bikers. He sounded amused, like he had just seen something funny. "Hey, watch where you're going, lady!" Another man shouted. His voice was mocking and cruel. Sophia's face tightened. She knew they were talking about her. She could hear the sneering laughter from the group of men. They weren't just passing by. No, they were slowing down, staying close to her on purpose. The tires of their bikes crunched loudly on the gravel as they circled around her like vultures. Max tensed even more, his sharp instincts warning him that something was wrong. He moved closer to Sophia, his body positioned protectively between her and the bikers. "Ah, poor blind lady," one of them jeered. "Where's your walking stick? Looks like she's got a dog to do the job." Another laughed, revving his engine aggressively. The sudden, loud noise startled nearby birds, causing them to fly away in a panic. Sophia's pulse quickened. She hated this feeling. She wasn't scared exactly, but she felt trapped, surrounded by these men who thought they could make fun of her. It wasn't the first time she had dealt with rudeness. There were always people who didn't understand what it was like to live without sight. But this was different. This wasn't just rude comments from a stranger passing by. This was intimidation. Sophia stood her ground, refusing to let fear take over. She tightened her grip on Max's leash. He stayed calm but alert, ready to act if necessary. He didn't bark or growl, he didn't need to. His presence was strong and steady, giving Sophia the confidence she needed. "Hey, lady, are you deaf too, or just blind?" One biker sneered. The others roared with laughter at his comment. Sophia took a deep breath. She knew better than to respond to their taunts. Giving them a reaction would only encourage them. She focused on Max instead, running her hand lightly over his fur. It calmed her nerves. Max's fur was smooth and warm under her touch. He was her protector, and she trusted him completely. Max, on the other hand, was silently observing the situation. His sharp eyes darted from one biker to the next, assessing each of them. He could sense their aggression, but he didn't react yet. He had been trained for situations like this. He knew when to stay calm and when to act. Right now, his job was to protect Sophia and wait for her signal. "Hey, check this out!" one of the bikers called out. He revved his engine again and rode his bike closer to Sophia. The gravel sprayed under his tires, some of it hitting her shoes. She flinched slightly but held her ground. The man leaned over his handlebars and smirked. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe your dog ate it?" The group laughed again, their voices echoing in the empty trail. Another biker added, "Man, I bet she doesn't even know we're here." Sophia clenched her jaw. She could hear every word, every cruel laugh. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of reacting. Instead, she focused on her breathing. In and out. Calm and steady. She knew Max was watching over her. One of the bikers made a mistake. He thought he could push things further. He slowed his bike to a stop and got off. His heavy boots crunched on the gravel as he walked toward Sophia and Max. "Let's see how tough your dog really is," the man muttered under his breath. He reached out, his hand moving toward Max's collar. Before his hand could get any closer, Max moved. It was a quick, precise movement, almost too fast to follow. He stepped in front of Sophia, positioning himself as a barrier between her and the man. Max's posture changed. His body was tense, his head lowered slightly, and his eyes locked onto the biker with a piercing, no-nonsense stare. The low growl that came from Max was deep and threatening. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to send a chill down the man's spine. It was a sound that said, "Back off." The biker froze, his hand hovering in the air. He hadn't expected the dog to react like that. "Whoa, easy, dog," he said, his voice losing its mocking tone. Another biker laughed nervously. "Hey, man, maybe you shouldn't mess with that dog. He looks like he means business." The tension in the air grew thick. The bikers were starting to realize that this wasn't just an ordinary guide dog. Max wasn't scared of them. He wasn't going to back down. His presence alone was enough to make them hesitate. Sophia, sensing the shift in the situation, decided it was time to speak. Her voice was calm but firm. "You've had your fun. Now leave us alone." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. The man who had tried to approach Max slowly backed away. He didn't want to admit it, but he was intimidated by the dog's silent warning. "Let's go, guys," one of the other bikers muttered. "This is getting lame." "Yeah," another agreed, revving his engine. "This isn't worth it." One by one, the bikers climbed back onto their motorcycles. The engines roared to life again, but this time, the noise wasn't meant to intimidate. It was a sign of retreat. They sped off down the trail, their laughter fading into the distance. Sophia let out a long breath of relief. The tension in her body slowly melted away. She knelt down beside Max and ran her hand gently over his head. "Thank you, Max," she whispered. "You were amazing." Max wagged his tail slightly, his calm demeanor returning. The danger had passed, and he was once again the gentle guide dog that everyone in town knew and loved. Sophia stood up, feeling stronger than before. The bikers had tried to intimidate her, but they had failed. She wasn't afraid anymore. With Max by her side, she knew she could face anything. As they continued their walk, the peaceful sounds of the park returned. Birds chirped in the trees, and the gentle rustling of leaves filled the air. Sophia smiled softly. Life wasn't always easy, but with Max as her protector, she knew she would never have to face it alone. The roar of the motorcycles echoed in Sophia's ears. The bikers weren't going away. If anything, they were becoming bolder, circling her like sharks. Sophia could feel their eyes on her, watching, waiting to see how she would react. But she didn't flinch. She held onto Max's leash firmly. Max stood tall, his body stiff and alert. His ears were pointed straight up, catching every sound. He didn't bark, didn't growl, he didn't need to. His silent presence spoke volumes. Yet the bikers couldn't see it. They didn't know who Max really was or what he had been trained to do. To them, he was just a dog, and they thought they could mess with him. One of the bikers decided to push things further. He revved his engine a few times, the loud noise cutting through the air. Then he dismounted from his motorcycle and took a few steps toward Sophia and Max. Gravel crunched under his heavy boots. "Let's see what your mutt is made of," the man muttered. He reached out, his hand moving toward Max. It was a move meant to intimidate, to make Max back down in fear. But Max didn't budge. His eyes locked onto the man's hand, and his muscles tensed even more. Sophia felt Max shift his position slightly. He moved closer to her, standing between her and the man. His instincts told him that this person was a threat. "Stay calm, Max," Sophia whispered, her voice soft but steady. She trusted Max completely, but she also knew he wouldn't let anyone get too close to her without a warning. The biker smirked, clearly not understanding the situation. He thought he was in control. "What's he gonna do, huh? Sit on me?" he sneered, laughing at his own joke. The other bikers joined in, their laughter cruel and mocking. Sophia's heart raced, but she didn't let it show. Inside, she was tense, ready for anything. But outwardly, she remained composed. She knew Max had everything under control. He had been trained for moments just like this, situations where he had to protect someone without causing unnecessary harm. Max stayed perfectly still, his sharp eyes watching every move the biker made. His gaze was intense, unwavering. The biker hesitated for a moment, feeling a small flicker of doubt. Something about the dog's expression made him uneasy. It was as if Max was silently warning him, "Don't take another step." The man shook his head, brushing off the feeling. He didn't want to look weak in front of his friends. He took another step closer, but Max reacted in a flash. Without barking or lunging, Max shifted his position again, standing even more protectively in front of Sophia. He let out a low, deep growl, a sound so quiet and controlled that it sent a chill down the biker's spine. The biker froze. His cocky smile faded. He hadn't expected that. "Whoa, okay, easy, dog," he said, pulling his hand back. The other bikers noticed the change in his tone and grew quieter. "What's the matter, man?" one of them called out. "Afraid of a little dog?" "He's not just a dog," the man muttered under his breath, still eyeing Max warily. He could sense that Max wasn't like other dogs. There was something in Max's calm but powerful presence that made him feel small, as if he were the one being judged. Sophia stood her ground. She could hear the tension in the man's voice and knew that Max had gotten through to him. "I think you should leave now," she said calmly. "Max doesn't like bullies." One of the other bikers revved his engine, trying to regain control of the situation. "Come on, let's not waste time here," he said. "This is boring." But the man who had approached Max wasn't so sure anymore. He kept glancing at the dog, as if expecting him to suddenly attack. Max didn't move. He just stood there, watching, ready to defend Sophia if necessary. The bikers began to whisper among themselves. They didn't understand why their friend was suddenly so hesitant. "What's your problem?" "It's just a guide dog," one of them said, shaking his head. "You didn't see his eyes, man," the first biker replied. "He sounded shaken. There's something different about that dog." Sophia heard their conversation and couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. They were finally starting to realize that Max wasn't someone to mess with. Of course, they had no idea just how special he really was. Max wasn't just any guide dog. Before he had come into Sophia's life, he had been part of an elite team of military dogs. He had served alongside Navy SEALs on dangerous missions all over the world. He had been trained to handle high-pressure situations, to protect and defend without hesitation. Max didn't need to prove anything to these bikers. His training had taught him discipline, patience, and control. He knew when to act and when to wait. Right now, he was waiting. He wouldn't attack unless there was no other option. But he also wasn't going to let anyone hurt Sophia. "Let's get out of here," another biker finally said. "This isn't fun anymore." The leader of the group hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, whatever. Let's go." He climbed back onto his motorcycle and started the engine. The others followed his lead, one by one. The loud rumbling of their bikes filled the air again as they prepared to leave. Before they sped off, one of the bikers called out, "Next time, lady, you won't be so lucky." Sophia didn't respond. She just stood quietly, her hand resting on Max's back. She knew they were just trying to save face. The truth was, they were scared. Max had made them realize they weren't as tough as they thought. The bikers finally rode away, their engines fading into the distance. The park grew quiet again. The birds slowly returned to the trees, and the peaceful sounds of nature filled the air once more. Sophia let out a long breath of relief. She knelt down beside Max and stroked his fur. "Good boy, Max," she whispered softly. "You were incredible." Max wagged his tail slightly, his eyes softening as he looked at her. The tension in his body eased, and he returned to his calm, gentle self. For Max, the job was done. He had protected Sophia just as he had been trained to do. Sophia stood up and took a moment to gather herself. Her heart was still beating a little fast, but she felt safe now. Max had been her guardian angel once again. She smiled and gently tugged on his leash. "Come on, Max. Let's finish our walk." As they continued down the trail, Sophia couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. The bikers had seen her as weak, as someone they could easily intimidate. But they had underestimated her, and they had underestimated Max. Strength didn't always have to be loud or aggressive. Sometimes, true strength was quiet and steady, like the bond between a person and their guide dog. Sophia knew that with Max by her side, she could face anything. They walked on, the warm sun shining down on them. The path ahead was peaceful once more, and Sophia felt a deep sense of gratitude for her loyal friend. Max was more than just a guide, he was her protector, her hero, and her greatest source of strength. The tension in the air was thick. Sophia could feel it, like an invisible force pressing down on her shoulders. The sound of the motorcycles had died down for a moment, but the bikers hadn't left. They were still circling, still taunting her. Their leader, the man who had tried to scare Max earlier, wasn't ready to back off. Sophia stood tall, holding Max's leash firmly. She didn't show fear, but inside her heart was racing. She knew Max was ready, watching every move the bikers made. His body was tense but controlled. He didn't bark or make sudden movements. He was waiting for the right moment. The leader of the group sneered, stepping forward. His footsteps crunched on the gravel path. He wasn't laughing anymore. Maybe he was angry that Sophia hadn't cowered in fear. Maybe he was trying to prove something to his friends. Whatever his reason, he made a big mistake. "You think you can just stand there and act tough because you've got a dog?" the leader said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Let's see how tough you are without him." Before Sophia could say anything, the man lunged forward, his hand reaching out to grab her arm. Time seemed to slow down for a moment. Sophia gasped softly, but she didn't have time to pull away. That's when Max sprang into action. It happened in an instant. Max moved like a blur, faster than anyone could react. 1 second, he was standing calmly by Sophia's side, the next, he was between her and the biker, blocking the man's path. His once gentle eyes had changed, now sharp and intense. His body was low and ready, muscles coiled like a spring. And then came the sound, a deep, menacing growl that rumbled from his throat like thunder. The growl was different from before. It wasn't just a warning anymore. This was serious. It was a sound that told the biker, "You've crossed the line." The man froze mid-step, his eyes widening in shock. But it was too late. Max didn't wait for him to recover. With a quick, precise movement, Max grabbed hold of the man's arm, not with enough force to injure, but enough to send a clear message. The biker yelped in surprise, stumbling backward. His foot caught on a loose rock, and he fell hard onto the ground. "Whoa!" one of the other bikers shouted. "Did you see that?" The gang went silent, their earlier laughter and arrogance vanishing in an instant. They had never seen a dog move like that before. This wasn't just some ordinary guide dog. Max stood over the fallen biker, his gaze locked on the group. He wasn't attacking, but he wasn't backing down either. He was protecting Sophia, making sure no one else dared to come near her. "What kind of dog is that?" another biker stammered, his voice filled with fear and confusion. Max remained still, his presence alone enough to hold the entire gang at bay. His eyes were fierce, unblinking, and full of authority. He didn't need to bark or make any loud threats. His body language spoke louder than words, "If you come closer, you'll regret it." The fallen leader scrambled to his feet, dusting off his jacket with shaking hands. He looked around at his friends, clearly embarrassed. He had been humiliated by a dog. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. What could he say? He had been beaten, not by a person, but by a calm, disciplined protector who was faster and smarter than him. Sophia stepped forward slowly. She kept her hand resting on Max's back, feeling the strength beneath his fur. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of quiet confidence. "He's a retired Navy SEAL," she said simply. "And he doesn't take kindly to bullies." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The bikers stared at her in disbelief. "A SEAL?" one of them repeated, blinking rapidly. "Yeah, right," another muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. Sophia gave a small smile. "You think I'm lying?" she asked. "Go ahead. Try to come near me again and see what happens." The bikers hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. They didn't want to admit it, but they were scared. They could see that Max wasn't like other dogs. His movements were too precise, too controlled. This was a dog who had been trained for something far more serious than guiding someone through a park. The leader of the gang clenched his jaw. He didn't want to lose face in front of his friends, but deep down, he knew he couldn't win this. He had seen the way Max moved, the way he had disarmed him without breaking a sweat. Fighting a dog like that was a losing battle. "Let's get out of here," he finally muttered, turning back toward his motorcycle. He didn't look at Sophia or Max as he climbed onto his bike. The other bikers quickly followed his lead, starting their engines. Before they rode off, the leader glanced back one last time. His face was a mix of anger and fear. "You got lucky today," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had earlier. Sophia didn't respond. She didn't need to. The bikers revved their engines and sped away, the sound of their motorcycles fading into the distance. The park grew quiet once more. For a moment, neither Sophia nor Max moved. They stood together, listening to the peaceful sounds of nature returning. Birds chirped in the trees, and the soft rustling of leaves filled the air. Slowly, Sophia exhaled a long breath of relief. "You did it, Max," she whispered, kneeling down beside him. She stroked his head gently, feeling the tension in his body start to ease. "You protected me. Just like you always do." Max's eyes softened, the intensity fading away. He wagged his tail lightly, his expression calm and content. The danger was gone, and his job was done. He had kept Sophia safe, just as he had been trained to do. Sophia smiled, her fear replaced by gratitude and pride. Max wasn't just her guide dog. He was her protector, her hero. She knew that without him, things could have ended very differently. But with Max by her side, she never had to be afraid. "Come on," she said softly, standing up. "Let's finish our walk." They continued down the trail, the warm sun shining down on them. Sophia felt stronger than before. The bikers had seen her as weak, as an easy target. But they had been wrong, so wrong. With Max by her side, she wasn't helpless. She was powerful. As they walked, Sophia reflected on the lesson of the day. People often judged others by what they saw on the surface. They thought strength had to be loud, aggressive, and obvious. But real strength wasn't always like that. Sometimes, it was quiet and steady. Sometimes, it was the bond between a person and a loyal friend who would do anything to protect them. Sophia knew one thing for sure, no matter what challenges came her way, she and Max would face them together. And together, they were unstoppable. The leader of the bikers lay on the ground, struggling to get up. His face was red with embarrassment, and his hands were shaking slightly. He had never expected this. He thought messing with a blind woman and her guide dog would be easy something to amuse his friends. But now, he looked up into the calm, sharp eyes of Max and knew he had made a huge mistake. "Help me up," the leader muttered angrily, waving at his friends. The other bikers hesitated for a moment. They were still stunned by what had just happened. Max, who had seemed so calm and harmless before, had moved like a lightning bolt to defend Sophia. He hadn't barked or gone wild. He had acted with precision and control, just like a soldier on a mission. "Come on, man, let's go," one of the bikers said, his voice low and uneasy. He reached down and helped the leader to his feet. The leader brushed himself off quickly, avoiding eye contact with Max. He was still shaken. Max stood his ground, his strong body between Sophia and the bikers. His intense gaze didn't waver. He wasn't aggressive, but he didn't need to be. The bikers knew now that they couldn't push him or Sophia around. Every muscle in Max's body was alert, ready to act if needed. You should keep that dog on a leash," the leader mumbled weakly, still trying to regain some dignity. Sophia tilted her head slightly, a small smile forming on her lips. "Max is on a leash," she said calmly, her voice steady and confident. "And he knows exactly what to do with it. Maybe next time, you'll think twice before you try to scare someone." The bikers didn't respond. They were too humiliated to say anything else. One of them muttered something under his breath, but it was drowned out by the sound of their motorcycles starting up again. The leader gave one last glance at Max, as if hoping the dog would somehow look less intimidating now. But Max didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on the bikers, silently warning them, "Don't come any closer. You messed with the wrong people today," Sophia said softly but firmly. Her words carried a quiet power that left no room for argument. The bikers scrambled to pick up their fallen friend and backed away slowly, their confidence shattered. They muttered quick, half-hearted apologies as they mounted their bikes. Their earlier bravado, the loud taunts, the laughter, the cocky attitudes was completely gone. They looked like scared children who had just been caught doing something they shouldn't have. Within minutes, they sped off down the trail, their engines roaring. But this time, the noise wasn't meant to intimidate. It was the sound of retreat. The bikers didn't even glance back as they disappeared from view, their pride left behind on the gravel path. Sophia listened as the sound of the motorcycles faded into the distance. The park grew quiet once more. Slowly, the peaceful sounds of nature returned, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. It was as if the park itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Sophia took a deep breath, letting the tension in her body melt away. She knelt down beside Max, resting her hand gently on his head. His fur was warm under her fingers, and she could feel the strength in him, the steady, calm presence that had been her protector through it all. "Good boy," she whispered softly. "You were amazing, Max." "Thank you." Max wagged his tail slightly, his eyes softening. The intensity from earlier faded away, replaced by his usual calm and loyal expression. He nuzzled Sophia's hand gently, as if to say, "I'm just doing my job." Sophia smiled and stroked his fur. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and pride. Max wasn't just her guide dog, he was her hero, her guardian. He had been there for her when she needed him most, and she knew he always would be. A few moments later, Sophia stood up and adjusted her grip on Max's leash. The adrenaline that had been rushing through her veins was finally settling. She took another deep breath and listened to the sounds around her. The park was peaceful again, just as it had been before the bikers showed up. But she knew this day would stay with her for a long time. As she and Max continued their walk down the trail, Sophia reflected on what had just happened. People often judged her based on her blindness. They assumed that because she couldn't see, she was weak or helpless. But today had proven something important, appearances can be deceiving. Sophia might not have her sight, but she had something far more powerful, a loyal companion who would protect her no matter what. Max walked calmly beside her, his posture relaxed once more. He seemed completely at ease, as if the confrontation with the bikers had never happened. But Sophia knew that if danger came again, Max would be ready. He always was. As they neared the park's central path, a few familiar voices called out to Sophia. It was Mrs. Perkins, the elderly woman who often sat on her porch near the park entrance. She waved at Sophia from a bench. "Sophia! Are you all right, dear?" Mrs. Perkins asked, concern in her voice. "I saw those bikers earlier. They looked like trouble." Sophia smiled and walked over to the bench with Max. "We're fine, Mrs. Perkins," she replied gently. "Max took care of everything." Mrs. Perkins leaned forward slightly, eyeing Max with admiration. "Oh, I don't doubt that for a second. He's a remarkable dog. You're lucky to have him." "I know," Sophia said, patting Max's head again. "I couldn't ask for a better friend." Other park-goers began to gather around, curious about what had happened. Word had spread quickly about the bikers and how Max had stood his ground. People whispered to each other, amazed by the story. "Did you hear? That dog protected her from a whole gang of bikers. They say he's a retired Navy SEAL dog. Wow, I've never seen a dog like that before." Sophia felt a little overwhelmed by the attention but also grateful. She knew that Max's bravery had made an impression on everyone. Maybe the next time someone judged her or thought she was an easy target, they would remember this moment. One young boy approached cautiously, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Excuse me, Miss Sophia," he said softly. "Is your dog really a hero?" Sophia chuckled gently. "Yes, he is. Max has been trained to protect and guide me. He's very special." The boy grinned. "That's so cool. I want a dog like Max someday." "You'll have to take good care of him," Sophia said kindly. "Dogs like Max are more than just pets. They're partners and friends for life." The boy nodded eagerly before running off to tell his parents. Sophia couldn't help but smile. Moments like these reminded her of the beauty in life, the kindness of strangers, the joy of connection, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the park, Sophia and Max made their way home. The day had been long and filled with challenges, but Sophia felt stronger than ever. She knew that with Max by her side, she could face anything the world threw at her. People might see her blindness as a weakness, but they were wrong. Sophia had a strength that went beyond sight. And Max was a constant reminder that true power often comes in quiet, steady forms like the unwavering loyalty of a best friend. Have you ever had someone stand up for you when you needed it most? Or maybe you've been that protector for someone else. Share your story in the comments below. And remember, true strength isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes, it's the quiet courage of a protector who's always by your side. The park slowly returned to its peaceful state. The chirping of birds filled the air again, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the tall trees. The golden rays of the setting sun painted everything in soft light. It was the kind of calm that made you feel like everything was right in the world again. Max, standing beside Sophia, had completely relaxed. His tense, alert posture had melted away. His tail wagged softly, and his eyes were calm and steady once more. To anyone passing by, Max now looked like any other loyal, friendly guide dog. There was no sign of the fierce protector they had seen just moments ago. Sophia smiled softly, reaching down to stroke Max's head. His fur felt warm under her hand, and she could feel his heartbeat slowing, steady and strong. Max glanced up at her with gentle eyes. He seemed to understand that the danger was gone and that his job for the day was done. Still, he stayed close by her side, always ready to guide and protect her. Sophia took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. The fear and tension from earlier had vanished. Now, she felt proud of Max and proud of herself for standing her ground. The bikers had thought she was weak, easy to scare, but they had learned the truth. Sometimes, people think they can walk all over you, Sophia murmured, speaking her thoughts aloud. But they forget, strength isn't always obvious. Max wagged his tail gently as if agreeing with her. Sophia knew that people often judged others based on appearances. Because she was blind, many assumed she was helpless. They thought she needed others to protect her at all times. But they didn't see the inner strength she carried. They didn't see the quiet but powerful bond she had with Max, a bond built on trust, loyalty, and shared experiences. For a moment, Sophia let her mind drift back to the first time she had met Max. It had been at a training center for guide dogs. She had been nervous, unsure if she would ever find a dog who truly understood her needs. But the moment she met Max, something just clicked. He had walked right up to her, gentle and calm, and rested his head on her lap. It was as if he had chosen her, not the other way around. From that day forward, they had been inseparable. Max had not only guided her through crowded streets and unfamiliar places but had also given her the confidence to face the world head-on. He was her partner, her guardian, and her best friend. And today, he had shown once again just how incredible he was. Sophia's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned her head slightly, listening. It was Mrs. Perkins, the elderly woman who often sat on the park bench near the entrance. Sophia could tell it was her by the sound of her slow, careful steps and the slight shuffle of her shoes. "Hello again, Sophia," Mrs. Perkins greeted warmly. "Are you all right, dear? I heard about what happened with those bikers. It must have been frightening." Sophia smiled softly. "It was, at first. But Max handled it. He always does." Mrs. Perkins chuckled. "I don't doubt that for a second. That dog of yours is something special." "He really is," Sophia agreed. She reached down to give Max another pat. He leaned into her touch, his tail wagging a little faster now. Mrs. Perkins sighed and shook her head. "It's a shame, though. Some people think they can take advantage of others just because they seem vulnerable. But they don't realize that strength comes in many forms." "Exactly," Sophia said. "People judge too quickly. They don't take the time to understand someone's story." The two women sat quietly for a moment, listening to the sounds of the park. Children were playing in the distance, their laughter echoing through the trees. A couple walked hand in hand along the path, their footsteps light and cheerful. Life was moving forward, as it always did. "You know," Mrs. Perkins said thoughtfully, "I think stories like yours need to be shared. People need to hear about the strength it takes to face challenges like yours. Maybe it will make them think twice before judging someone based on appearances." Sophia nodded. "I hope so. And I hope people remember that guide dogs like Max are more than just helpers. They're heroes in their own right. They have their own stories, their own pasts, and they're capable of so much more than people realize." Mrs. Perkins smiled warmly. "Well, I'm certainly inspired. And I'm sure everyone who hears about what happened today will be, too." As Mrs. Perkins walked back to her bench, Sophia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wanted to be a voice for others like her, people who faced daily challenges and were often misunderstood. And she wanted people to understand the incredible role that service animals like Max played in their lives. Sophia continued her walk with Max by her side. The path was smooth under her feet, and the sounds of nature surrounded her in a comforting embrace. She thought about all the times she had overcome obstacles with Max's help. Each challenge had made her stronger, more determined. She knew there would be more difficulties ahead, but she wasn't afraid. With Max beside her, she could face anything. As they walked, Sophia spoke softly to Max. "You know, Max, I wish more people understood what it's like to have a guide dog like you. You're not just here to lead me around. You're my protector, my partner. We're a team, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Max looked up at her, his ears perked and his eyes full of loyalty. He didn't need words to understand her. His actions had always spoken louder than words ever could. Sophia continued, her voice thoughtful. The next time someone sees us, I hope they remember that there's always more to a story than what they see on the surface. Maybe they'll think twice before making assumptions. Max wagged his tail again, as if agreeing with her once more. Sophia smiled and gave him a gentle pat. Together, they walked toward the edge of the park, where the trees opened up to reveal the wide, open sky. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. It was a beautiful reminder of the strength and beauty in life's quiet moments. Sometimes, the greatest strength wasn't found in loud displays of power. It was found in the quiet, steady presence of a friend who stood by your side through thick and thin. It was found in the courage to keep moving forward, even when the world tried to hold you back. Sophia and Max continued their walk, savoring the peacefulness of the evening. The park had returned to its natural rhythm, and so had they. Together, they knew they could face whatever came next. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and with that bond came a strength that no one could take away. As they walked into the fading light, Sophia reflected once more on the lesson of the day: strength isn't always obvious. And sometimes, the strongest protectors are the ones who walk quietly beside you, ready to defend you at a moment's notice. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone or something showed you unexpected strength? Share your story in the comments below. And remember, there's always more to someone's journey than what you see. Strength comes in many forms, and sometimes, it's the quiet kind that makes all the difference.